The Bagratid Kingdom of Armenia, also known as Bagratid Armenia, was an independent state established by Ashot I Bagratuni in the early 880s following nearly 2 centuries of foreign domination of Greater Armenia, under Arab Umayyad and Abbasid rule. With the 2 contemporary powers in the region, the Abbasids and Byzantines, too preoccupied to concentrate their forces in subjugating the people of the region and the dissipation of several of the Armenian nakharar noble families, Ashot was able to assert himself as the leading figure of a movement to dislodge the Arabs from Armenia. Ashot's prestige rose as he was courted by both Byzantine and Arab leaders eager to maintain a buffer state near the frontiers. The Caliphate recognized Ashot as Prince of Princes in 862 and, later on, King in 884 or 885. The establishment of the Bagratuni kingdom later led to the founding of several other Armenian principalities and kingdoms: Turan, Vaspurakan, Kars, Kharkan and Sainik. Unity among all these states was sometimes difficult to maintain, while the Byzantines and Arabs lost no time in exploiting the kingdom's situation to their own gains. Under the reign of Ashot III, Arni became the kingdom's capital and grew into a thriving economic and cultural center. The first half of the 11th century saw the decline and eventual collapse of the kingdom, with Emperor Basil II's string of victories in annexing parts of southwestern Armenia. King Hovhannes felt forced to cede his lands and in 1022 promised to will his kingdom to the Byzantines following his death. However, after Hovhannes' death in 1041, his successor, Gagik II, refused to hand over Arni and continued resistance until 1045, when his kingdom, plagued with internal and external threats, was finally taken by Byzantine forces. History. Background: the weakening of the Sasanian Empire during the 7th century led to the rise of another regional power, the Muslim Arabs. The Umayyad Arabs had conquered vast swaths of territory in the Middle East and, turning north, began to periodically launch raids into Armenia territory in 640. Theodore Stani, the Armenian Curopalates, signed a peace treaty with the Caliphate, although the continuing war with the Arabs and Byzantines soon led to further destruction throughout Armenia. In 661, Armenian leaders agreed to submit under Muslim rule, while the latter conceded to recognize Grigor Mamukonian from the powerful Mamukonian nakharar family as Ishkan of Armenia. Known as Al-Armenia, with its capital at Dvin, the province was headed by an ostikan, or governor. However, Umayyad rule in Armenia grew in cruelty in the early 8th century. Revolts against the Arabs spread throughout Armenia until 705, when, under the pretext of meeting for negotiations, the Arab ostikan of Nikhishevan massacred almost all of the Armenian nobility. The Arabs attempted to conciliate with the Armenians, but the levying of higher taxes, impoverishment of the country due to a lack of regional trade, and the Umayyads' preference of the Bagratuni family over the Mamukonians made this difficult to accomplish. Taking advantage of the overthrow of the Umayyads by the Abbasids, a second rebellion was conceived, although it too was met with failure, partly because of the frictional relationship between the Bagratuni and Mamukonian families. The rebellion's failure also resulted in the near disintegration of the Mamukonian house, which lost most of the land it controlled. A third and final rebellion, stemming from similar grievances as the second, was launched in 774 under the leadership of Mishag Mamukonian and with the support of other nakharars. The Abbasid Arabs, however, marched into Armenia with an army of 30,000 men and decisively crushed the rebellion and its instigators at the Battle of Bagratid on April 24, 775, leaving a void for the sole largely intact family, the Bagratunis, to fill. Rise of the Bagratids. The Bagratuni family had done its best to improve its relations with the Abbasid Caliphs ever since they took power in 750. The Abbasids always treated the families over to us with suspicion, but by the early 770s, the Bagratunis had won them over and the relationship between the two drastically improved. The Bagratuni family members were soon viewed as leaders of the Armenians in the region. Following the end of the Third Rebellion, which the Bagratunis had wisely chosen not to participate in, and the dispersal of several of the princely houses, the family was left without any formidable rivals. Nevertheless, any immediate opportunities to take full control of the region was complicated by Arab immigration to Armenia and the Caliph's appointment of emirs to rule in newly created administrative districts. Fortunately for the Armenians, the number of Arabs residing in Armenia never grew in number to form a majority, nor were the emirates fully subordinate to the Caliph, as historian George Bornushan observes. This fragmentation of Arab authority provided the opportunity for the resurgence of the Bagratuni family headed by Ashot I. Ashot began to annex the lands that formerly belonged to the Mamukonians and actively campaigned against the emirs as a sign of his allegiance to the Caliphate, who in 804 bestowed upon him the title of Ishkhan. Upon his death in 826, Ashot bequeathed his land to two of his sons. The eldest, Bagratuni, received Harran and Sasan and inherited the prestigious title of Ishkhan, Ishkhan, or Prince of Princes, whereas his brother, Smabat the Confessor, became the Sparapet of Spur and Tate. The brothers, however, were unable to resolve their differences with one another nor able to form a unified front against the Muslims. A new Armenian rebellion against Arab rule broke out in 850, led by Bagratid Armenia of Vaspurakan, but like previous rebellions, it failed. An Arab army led by the Turkish general Bagar al-Kabir captured Bagrat, Smabat, and other Armenian princes and brutally put down the rebellion. Establishment of the kingdom. Armenian fortunes were reversed in 867 with the accession of the Armenian Emperor of Byzantium Basil I, whose successful military campaigns against the Arabs conclusively weakened Abbasid rule in Armenia. In 857, Smabat had been succeeded by his son Ashot I, who took a measured approach to gradually retake territories formerly held by the Arabs. He assumed the title Prince of Princes in 862 and appointed his brother Abbas Sparapet as they began to push the Arabs out from the Byzantine. His initial efforts to expel the Ostikhan of Armenia failed, although this did not dissuade him in taking advantage of the Byzantine-Arab rivalry. Early on, he was courted by Byzantium, desperate to secure its eastern flanks so as to direct its full strength against the Arabs, although Ashot avowed his loyalty to the empire. Byzantine leaders continued their long-standing demand that the Armenian Church make religious concessions to the Eastern Orthodox Church. A synod of Armenian church leaders was convoked and a letter laden with equivocal wording sent to Constantinople was able to sustain a temporary agreement between the two churches. In any case, religious differences mattered little to the Byzantines in consideration of the menace the Arabs continued to pose. In 884, the Caliph al-Mu'tamid, reacting to the demands of Armenian princes and religious leaders and, more importantly, the security risks in allowing Armenia to fall under the Byzantine orbit, sent a crown to Ashot recognizing him as king. This act was not lost on Basil, who similarly sent a crown to Ashot. Ashot relocated his throne to the fortress city of Bagran, and it was here where his coronation ceremony was held sometime in 884 or 885. Thus, Ashot restored the Armenian monarchy and became Armenia's first king since 428. He secured the favor of both the Byzantines and Arabs, but ultimately showed loyalty to Basil and chose to conclude an alliance with the Byzantines in 885. Ashot was not the sole Armenian prince of the region, yet he commanded the full support of the other princes who recognized his authority in his becoming of king. With his status of king, his authority also carried over to the neighboring states of Georgia, Caucasian Albania, and several of the Arab Emirates. Ashot's reign was brief, and upon his death in 890, he was succeeded by his son Smabat I. Smabat I was crowned king in 892, following a brief attempt by his uncle Abbas to disrupt his succession to the throne. Smabat continued his father's policy of maintaining cordial relations with Byzantium, but he remained mindful of the Arabs' fears of the Armeno-Byzantine alliance. Speaking with the Arab Ostocan Muhammad ibn Abi al-Saj, Smabat convinced him that the alliance would not only be for the dual benefit of Byzantium and Armenia but would also work to the economic favor of the Arabs. Smabat also achieved a major victory when on April 21, 892, he recaptured the historic city of Dvin from the Arabs. Smabat's successes shortly came to a halt when Afshan decided that he could not countenance a powerful Armenia so close to his domains. He retook Dvin and managed to take Smabat's wife as a hostage until she was released in exchange for Smabat's son and nephew. The wars against Armenia continued even after Afshan's death in 901, when his brother Yusuf ibn Abi al-Saj became Ostocan of Armenia. While Yusuf's reign was not immediately hostile, Smabat committed a series of blunders which led to several of his allies to turn their backs on him. Having sought to placate his eastern ally, Smabat of Sarnik, by ceding to him Nakhichevan city, Smabat inadvertently drove Gagik through near Vaspurakan into Yusuf's arms, since the city was a part of Gagik's domains. Yusuf took advantage of this feud by awarding Gagik a crown in 908, thus making him King Gagik I of Vaspurakan and creating an Armenian state opposed to the one led by Smabat. As Yusuf began a new campaign against Smabat in conjunction with Gagik in 909, neither the Byzantines nor the Caliph sent aid to Smabat. Several Armenian princes also chose to withhold their support. Those who did ally with Smabat were dealt brutally by Yusuf's powerful army. Smabat's son Mushek, his nephew Smabat Bagratuni, and Grigor II of Western Sarnik were all poisoned. Yusuf's army ravaged the rest of Armenia as it advanced towards Blue Fortress, where Smabat had taken refuge, and besieged it for some time. Smabat finally decided to surrender himself to Yusuf in 914 in hopes of ending the Arab onslaught. Yusuf, however, showed no compassion towards his prisoner as he tortured the Armenian king to death and put his headless body on display on a cross in Dvin. Resurgence under Ashot I. Yusuf's invasion of Armenia had left the kingdom in ruins, and this fact resonated among the Armenian princes, who were left aghast in witnessing the Arab Ostocan's brutality. Gagik I was especially shaken, and he soon disavowed his loyalty to Yusuf and began to campaign against him. With Yusuf distracted by the resistance put up by his former ally, Smabat's son Ashot II felt it appropriate to assume his father's throne. Ashot at once began to drive the Muslims out of his domains. Support for Ashot also arrived from the west. The Byzantine Empress Zoe had watched the Arab invasion of Armenia unfold with consternation, and so she ordered the Patriarch Nicholas Mystikos to write an official letter to the Armenian Catholicos to form a new alliance with Armenia. The Catholicos responded amicably, and in 914, Ashot accepted an invitation by Zoe to visit Constantinople. There Ashot was well received, and a Byzantine force was created to assist Armenia in defeating the Arabs. The force, accompanying Ashot and led by the domestic of the schools Leo Phocas, moved out the next year and marched along Upper Euphrates, entering Tehran with scant opposition from the Arabs. Meanwhile, Yusuf's efforts to crush Gagik had failed miserably. Instead, Yusuf turned his attention to Ashot and attempted to weaken his position by crowning Ashot's cousin Ashot Shapuhayan king of Armenia. Ashot Shapuyans and Yusuf's armies, though, were unable to stop the Byzantine advance, which stopped short of capturing Dvin due to the onset of winter. Nevertheless, the force had returned Ashot to a powerful position in Armenia and managed to inflict heavy casualties against the Arabs. This still left Ashot, the anti-king, in control in Dvin, and civil war raged on from 918 to 920, when the pretender finally conceded defeat. Numerous other rebellions in Armenia also took place, but Ashot was able to defeat each one of them. In 919, Yusuf had instigated a failed rebellion against the Caliph and was replaced by a far more well-disposed Ostican, Subak. Subak recognized Ashot as the legitimate ruler of Armenia and awarded him with the title of Shahanshah, or King of Kings. Ironically, the Byzantines were distressed with Ashot's close relations with the Arabs and dispatched a new force under the Armenian domestic of the schools, John Korkoar, to disrupt Ashot's position as king and to support the rebels fighting him. In 928, Korkoar reached Dvin in an unsuccessful attempt to capture a city that was defended by both the Arabs and Ashot. In 923, the Caliph, facing troubles at home, released Yusuf, who traveled back to Armenia to unleash his fury against Armenia and especially Gagik. He began demanding tribute from the Armenians' rule but faced considerable resistance by Ashot II. Time and again, Ashot was able to defeat and rout the Arab armies sent against him for several years. Finally, in 929, Yusuf died and an immense power struggle ensued between rival Iranian and Kurdish families in Azerbaijan, thus reducing the Arab threat to Armenia. Byzantine Emperor Romanos Lekarpanes also turned his attention from the east to fight the Arabs in Syria. Ashot's efforts to preserve and defend the kingdom earned him the epithet Ukat, or Wyan. He died in 929 and was succeeded by his brother, Abbasi. Stability under Abbasi's reign was characterized with an unusual period of stability and prosperity that Armenia had not enjoyed for decades. His capital was based at the fortress city of Kars, and Abbas achieved numerous successes on both the foreign and domestic fronts. In the same year that he became king, Abbas traveled to Dvin, where he was able to convince the Arab governor to release several Armenian hostages and turn over control of the pontifical palace back to Armenia. Conflict between the Arabs were minimal too, with the exception of a military defeat Abbas suffered near the city of Vatashipat. He was far less conciliatory towards the Byzantines, who had repeatedly demonstrated their unreliability as allies by attacking and annexing Armenian territories. Fortunately for him, Romanus of Byzantium was more focused on fighting the Arab Hamdanids, leaving Abbas virtually free free to conduct his policies without foreign hindrance. Another foreign threat that Abbas steadfastly confronted was an invasion by King Bir of Abkhazia in 943. A new church had been completed in Kars, under Abbas orders, and prior to its consecration, Bir had appeared with an army along the river of the Araxes, demanding that the new church be consecrated under Chalcedonian rite. Abbas refused to make any concessions and ambushed Bir's forces in a dawn assault. Several more skirmishes took place, wherein Bir was finally captured by Abbas men. Abbas took the king to his new church and told him that he would never see it again, blinding him and sending him back to Abkhazia. Abbas died in 953, leaving his kingdom to his two sons, Ashot III and Mushe. Armenia's golden age. Ashot I's official investiture as king of Armenia took place in 961, following the relocation of the Holy See from Vaspurakan to Arjuna, near the city of Ani. In attendance were several contingents of the Armenian military, 40 bishops, the king of Caucasian Albania, as well as Catholicos and Ania Mokatsi, who crowned the king with the title of Shahanshah. In that same year, Ashot had also relocated the capital from Kars to Ani. The Bagratuni kings had never chosen a city to settle in. Alternating from Bagran to Sharakivan to Kars, Kars never did reach a status where it could become a capital, and Dvin was disregarded altogether, given its proximity to the hostile emirates. Ani's natural defences were well suited. Ashot's desire to secure an area which could withstand siege and fell on a trade route that passed from Dvin to Trebizond. Owing to this trade route, the city quickly began to grow and became Bagratuni, Armenia's chief political, cultural and economic center. Shops, markets, workshops, inns were established by the city's merchants and populace, while the nakharar elite went on to sponsor the building of magnificent mansions and palaces. The construction was also complemented by the King Ashot's own philanthropy, including the building of the famed Ashot walls that were erected around Ani, monasteries, hospitals, schools, and almshouses. Ashot's sponsorship of the construction of all these edifices earned him the nickname of Voghormats, or the Merciful. Ashot was also largely successful in foreign affairs. When a Byzantine army led by the Byzantine Emperor John I Zimisks entered Taran in 973, purportedly to avenge the death of his domestic killed at the hands of the Arabs in Mosul, Ashot mobilized an 80,000-man army to meet and force its withdrawal. In the following year, he concluded an alliance with Zimisks and sent 10,000 Armenian troops to campaign with the emperor against the Muslim emirates in Aleppo and Mosul. Ashot also had unsuccessfully attempted to capture Dvin from the Shaddadid Emir in 953. He had laid siege to it for quite some time but was forced to lift it after finding the city too well defended. Sub-kingdoms, a new phenomenon that began under Ashot I's reign and continued under his successors, was the establishment of sub-kingdoms throughout Bagratuni Armenia. Ashot III had sent his brother Mishagai to rule in Kars and had allowed him to use the title of king. The administrative district of Dazoraj near Lake Sevan was given to Ashot's son Gurgen, the progenitor of the Kiurikid line, in 966, who would later assume the title of king. The proliferation of so many kingdoms worked to the benefit of Armenia so long as the king in Ani remained strong and maintained his hegemony over other kings. Otherwise, the kings, as well the respective bishops who would claim the position of Catholicos and formulate their own doctrines, would begin to test the limits of their autonomy. Progress under Smbat and Gagik. This prosperous age which Armenia lived through continued unabated under the reign of Ashot's son and successor, Smbat II. Arni had grown so large by the time of Smbat's accession in 977 that a second set of walls, known as the Smbatatian walls, were ordered built by the new king. Decline and Byzantine encroachment. The Byzantines had slowly been creeping eastward towards Armenia in the final decade of the 10th century. Emperor Basil II's numerous victories against the Arabs and internal Arab struggles helped clear a path towards the Caucasus. Constantinople's official policy was that no Christian ruler is equal to or independent of the Byzantine emperor, and even if it was at time masked with diplomatic compromises, the empire's ultimate goal was a complete annexation of the Armenian realms. By the middle of the 10th century, the Byzantine Empire lay along the full length of the western border of Armenia. Turan was the first Armenian region annexed by the Byzantine Empire. In a certain sense, the Byzantines considered the Bagratuni princes of Turan as the vassals, for they had consistently accepted titles, such as that of strategos, and stipends from Constantinople. With the death of Ashot Bagratuni of Turan in 967, not to be confused with Ashot III, his sons Gregory and Bagrat were not able to withstand the pressure from the empire, which annexed the principality outright and converted it to a theme. This was soon followed by the annexation of the lands ruled by the Curopalate David of Take, to whom he had left territories in 979. In 3 campaigns in 1001, 1014, and 1021 or 1022, Karen Manazkert, as well as David's own hereditary principality of Takra next to the Byzantine Empire, is the theme of Iberia, with Karen as its capital. This wide arc of lands comprised the western border regions of Armenia and curved eastward deep into the central plateau to reach as far as Manazkert north of Lake Van. The Artsruni kingdom of Vaspurakan was later annexed as well. In 1003, the last ruler of the kingdom, Sennacherib Hovhan, son-in-law of King Gagik I of Arni, had brushed aside his nephews to become the sole king of Vaspurakan. His rule became even more precarious in the second decade of the 11th century with the plundering raids of various Turkmen groups. In 1016, Sennacherib Hovhan thus offered Basil II the lands of Vaspurakan, including 72 fortresses and 4,000 villages, in exchange for a vast domain farther west on the Byzantine territory centered on the city of Sebastia, to which he moved in 1021 together with his family and 14,000 retainers. Basil II had meanwhile already sent an army from the Balkans to Vaspurakan even before Sennacherib Hovhan's offer, and reduced it to another Byzantine theme with Van as regional capital. With the fall of the Artsruni kingdom, Byzantine power was firmly established on the Armenian highlands, with only the Bagratuni and Eastern Syriacan back kingdoms remaining independent. Internal quarrels and fall. After the death of King Gagik I, the kingdom was split between his two sons. Hovhan Smbat, who received the territory of Arni, and Ashot I the Brave, who kept a territory that should have included Dvin, but which he could not occupy because of its capture by the Shaddadid Abul Aswashavur ibn Fadl from Gandak. The two brothers fought throughout their lives. In these tumultuous days, embroiled in territorial quarrels, the childless Hovhan Smbat sent the Catholicos Petros Getadarts to Byzantium in order to negotiate a partial respite by leaving his kingdom to the empire after his death. Immediate results of this action were unknown, but after the death of the two brothers in 1040–41, The new Byzantine emperor and successor Basil II claimed the kingdom of Bagratid Armenia. The son of Ashot, young Gagik II, with the support of Sparapet Varapalavuni and his followers, reigned only for a period of 2 years. Despite internal dissension led by pro-Byzantine overseer Steward Sargus Hakassan, the Armenian king was able to repel a Turkmen attack. However, possibly with the persuasion of Sargus, he accepted the invitation of Emperor Constantine IX to Constantinople, where he was obliged to cede his domain to the empire in exchange for a domain in Cappadocia. In 1044, the Byzantines twice invaded Arni but failed to conquer it. In view of this dire situation, Catholicos Petros Getards, who governed Arni in the king's absence, surrendered Arni to the Byzantines in 1045. Arni was then annexed to the theme of Iberia, which was renamed Iberia and Arni, or Iberia and Armenia. The Bagratid king of Kars, Gagik Abbas, still kept his throne even after 1064 when Arni fell to the Seljuk Turks, but even he was constrained to cede his lands to the Byzantines and retreat to Anatolia, only to see Kars captured by the Turks in 1065. In Bak and eastern Sinai, only a few Armenian fortresses remained.